Welcome. Thanks for being here. So we're in this series on spiritual family trees right now, and didn't have anybody who volunteered to share their spiritual family tree today. So I thought we'd look at the gnarled family tree of someone in the Bible, Jacob. I'll have you kind of help me trace the people in his family and experiences that most shaped his faith. So if you have a Bible, I'll grab it and have a look at it. We've got more copies here if anybody wants one. If you have your phone, and have it on your phone. You can phone it there. Here's the other copies. So we're going to start with his grandparents. Of course, I have them up here. A and S. Abram and Sarai. Right, yeah. So originally, they were named Abram and Sarai. So what can you tell me about them? Where were they kind of at the beginning of the story in Genesis 12? Where did Abram and Sarai grow up? Yeah, way out east. Actually, further east than Haran, the land of Ur. Yeah, Ur of the Chaldeans. So it's like modern-day Iraq over there. And what gods did they worship there? Did they worship the one true God? No, they were pagans, like all the people around them. And their Abram's dad, what's his name? Terah, I think, decided to move to Canaan, and so they started heading west. Got the caravan together. But then he got sick. They stopped in a place called Haran and stayed there until Terah died. And so they just settled in there, were living their life. And then all of a sudden, what changed Abram's life? The whole trajectory.
The sun.
Well, it was before that, though. Yeah. Even before that, here they are just living in Haran, and all of a sudden God spoke to him. Appeared to him in a dream. And gave him 3 promises. Do you remember what those 3 promises were?
The father of many nations.
Right. First of all, and what do we know about Abram and Sarai at this point? No children, and they're pretty old. They're like, he was 80, she was 70, and God said, look up at the stars, see if you can count them. So shall your descendants be. And Abram believed God, accepted it, without being able to see it. And God said, go from your land, leave everything behind, go, with take your flocks and herds, but leave the rest of your family behind and go to the place where I will show you. And so they headed west, took everything along. And as they went, God also told them, not only will I make your descendants as numerous as the sand on the stars in the sky, but I will give you a land of your own. So go to the land that I will show you. And I will bless you so that you will be a blessing, so that through you and your descendants, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. So he gave them those 3 promises. So they went on to Canaan. But when they got to Canaan, they found that there was a famine there. And it was difficult to get enough to eat. And so they went even further. Where did they go? You go down and around the corner, you end up in Egypt. So they went to Egypt and stayed there for quite a while. And at one point, Sarah must have been incredibly beautiful. Even at 70, Abram said, you know what? You're so beautiful. The king is going to want you for his wife. So, and then he'll just kill me to get you. So, why don't you say that you're my sister? And so they did that, and sure enough, the king took her to be, in his harem. But then they had all these horrible things, plagues and stuff that were happening to the people, and and he found out, this is your wife? I thought you told me she was your sister. And sent them off. Said, get out of here. I'll give you everything you need. Get out of Egypt. And so they made their way back to Canaan. Famine was finally over. So years went by, and they didn't see the promise happen. They were still wandering around. They didn't have a land of their own, and they still had no child. So what did they do about that? What did they decide to do? Yeah. She said, well, maybe you're supposed to have a child with someone else, so you can have my servant Hagar. And Abram went along with it. And what was the name of their son? Ishmael. And so he was growing up, but then God appeared to Abram again and said, you will have a son through Sarah. In fact, he then changed their names from Abram and Sarai to Abraham and Sarah. So Abram means exalted ancestor. Abraham means ancestor of many. Sarai means my princess. Sarai simply means princess. So it's like God was changing their names to show what was going to happen in their lives. And sure enough, and so when God told them this again, how did Abraham and Sarah react? Yeah, they were like, you gotta be kidding. Here I am now, 90 and 80. How can we possibly have a child? They both laughed about it. And so God said, you will have a child. And in fact, you'll name him Isaac, which means he laughs. Because God got the last laugh. You laugh about my promise? I'll make you laugh a different way. Sure enough, Isaac came along. Well, then there was conflict between Sarah and Hagar, and so she convinced Abraham to get rid of them, send them off into the desert to die, essentially. But God rescued them, provided water for them and food in the desert, and told Hagar that Ishmael, who she thought was she'd just set him off to the side and just, I can't even bear to watch him die. God said, no, go to him. I will make him the father of many nations. 12 tribes will come from him. Just like eventually there were 12 tribes from Isaac. So, and what do you know about these 12 tribes? What did they become? All the Arab nations. So all this conflict that is still going and ramping up even more right now between Israel and all of the surrounding Arab nations. This is an old family feud that has never stopped. Yeah, way bigger than Hatfields and the Bows, exactly. So they had Isaac. He laughs. And Isaac ended up marrying a girl named Rebecca. There's another R a little bit later, yeah. Isaac and Rebecca. And they ended up having twins. And what were their names? Yep, Esau and Jacob. Which one came first? Esau. So what did coming first, what was the benefit of being the firstborn? Yeah, they had birthright, which meant, first of all, that they were to receive the firstborn male child would receive twice as much as all the rest. When the inheritance was split up.
We just go to even the one you can
So, yeah. So, but when they were born, Esau came first, and Jacob came out grabbing onto Esau's heel. In fact, that's why Esau essentially means red. He was like kind of reddish and hairy. And Jacob, his name literally means heel grabber, or he supplants. Because even before they were born, she could feel this, like they were rustling in her womb. What's going on in here? And God told her, there are two nations inside. And the younger, or the older, will serve the younger. So Jacob, this whole, yeah.
I got a question. Like Isaac, are they still living hundreds of years at this point? Or are they?
Yeah. So Abraham was 100 years old when Isaac, or 90 years old when, which was it? 100? Anyway, about a century old when Isaac was born, and then went on to live significantly longer than that before he died. So yeah, they were still very long lived at that time. So Jacob said, when he was growing up, his name heel grabber was pretty apt. That's exactly how he lived. Always scrabbling, always trying to get ahead. So what do you remember about the conflict between Jacob and Esau?
He cheated him out of his birthright.
Mm-hmm. So Esau was supposed to get twice as much, and so one day Esau, was kind of a hunter. He was always out, getting wild game, and Jacob was the shepherd. He was the one that stayed close to home. What else do you know about the dynamics between the four of them? Yep, they played favorites. Isaac's favorite was Esau, and Rebecca's favorite was Jacob. Playing favorites. Pitted the boys against each other because Rebecca told Jacob, Esau or Isaac was getting old and feeble, and he was, wanted to give his blessing to Esau and reaffirm, you are, or actually, this is before, that's later in the story. Earlier, Esau had come home. He'd been out hunting for a long time, didn't get anything, came home, he's just starving. He's like, oh! And Jacob was making a stew. And Esau came in and said, oh, that stew smells so good. Give me some of it. I'm going to die. What did Jacob ask him to do? Give me your birthright. If I'll give you some of the stew if you give me your birthright. the twice as much. Agree to let me have twice as much instead of you. And he sounds like, oh yeah, I'm gonna die. I'm gonna, what good is a birthright to me? Despised his birthright. Gave his word. that Jacob would have. He sprinkled it out for a pot of stew. And then later, when Isaac was, old, feeble, was to the point where he couldn't see at all, he wanted to give, special blessing. That was the other thing that the father would give to the oldest son was a blessing. And they really felt the words of the blessing had lasting power. Um, so please, Esau, go get me some of, get some wild game, cook me a good hearty stew like I love, and come in, give it to me, I'll eat it, and then I'll bless you, give you my final blessing. And so Esau goes off and hunts. What does Rebecca do?
She decides they're going to put the skin on.
Yeah, she comes up with this whole plan. She's like, while Esau's gone, I'm going to make some stew. You take it to your father and you'll get the blessing. But he was like, Mom, Esau's like totally hairy. He's gonna recognize my voice. He's not gonna believe me that I'm Esau. Here's what we'll do, Rebecca said. She took goat skin and put it on his arms and on his, on the back of his neck, and said, just go in and act like Esau. Say you're Esau and give him this stew. We did, and Isaac was a little confused. He was like, are you Esau? How did you get this? How did you get it so quickly? The stew. And he said, oh, the Lord gave me success. And I said, is that really you? You sound like Isaac. You sound like Jacob. And, but you felt his arms and like, oh, yeah, it feels like my son Esau. And it kind of smells like Esau. Gives him his blessing. And as soon as Jacob leaves the tent, who comes back into camp? Esau. The deer or whatever, cooks up the stew, brings it in, and says, Dad, I'm here. It's Esau. I'm here for my blessing. Here's your stew. And Isaac's like, what? Who just came in a few minutes ago? It was your brother. I've given him a blessing too. Esau's like, don't you have a blessing for me? And Isaac gives him kind of an anti-blessing. He said, oh, my son, I've already given everything to your brother. I've given him you've given him your birthright. I've given him my blessing. So the only blessing I have for you is you're going to live a nomadic life. You're not. It's kind of anti-blessing. You're going to serve your brother, and so how did Esau? What did Esau think about all that? Oh man! He's like, he cheated me out of my birthright, and now he's taking my blessing. I want to kill him. So Rebecca said, when Isaac dies, and that's not long from now, Esau's going to come after you. You got to get out of here. Get out of town. Go back to Haran, where we came from. We've got family out there. Go there and find a wife for yourself there. So he hightailed it east and went back to their old stomping grounds of Haran. Ended up meeting this beautiful young shepherdess who happened to be a relation of his. Remember what her name was?
Rachel.
Yeah, so this is Rebecca. This is Rachel. She's beautiful. He takes, waters her flocks for her, does all this stuff. And talks with her dad, Laban, and said, "Oh, I really love Rachel. I'd gladly work for you. Um, if you would give her to me in marriage." He said, "Okay, work 7 years, and I'll give her to you." So he worked 7 years, and God blesses Laban, and that everything is prospering, everything's going great. He's so excited. It's the wedding day. What happens on the wedding night? Another scandal involving a firstborn, because the firstborn daughter of Laban was Leah, and she had like weak eyes. She was not the pretty one, but they have the ceremony, and of course back then women were pretty well shrouded and went into the dark tent. And the next morning, Jacob wakes up. It's Leah! What? Apparently he'd had a little too much that night. He comes out. "What have you done to me, Laban?" And Laban was like, "Oh, didn't you know? It's our tradition. The oldest sister has to be married first, but work it, spend the whole wedding week with her, and then I'll give you Rachel too if you work another 7 years for me." So a week later, he gets married to Rachel, and he works for another 7 years, and everything continues to prosper. Now he's got 2 wives. That never goes well. There was conflict here. Now there's all kinds of conflict here. And for quite a while, the women kind of have like this contest, because Rachel, of course, is the favored one, the one that Jacob really loves. But who starts having kids? Leah gets 4 kids in a row, 4 sons in a row. None for Rebecca. She's devastated. Back then, having sons was the way that provided like your Social Security blanket. That was needed men to work the fields or be the shepherds, that kind of thing. And without that, you're filled with shame and no future. And so, what does Rachel decide to do about that? Yep. Let's take a page out of Grandma Sarah's book. Here, take my servant girl, Bilhah. And so, 2 sons are born to Bilhah. And then Leah stops having children. What does she do? Here, take my servant, Zilpah. Zilpah has 2. They're having this contest of who can have more children. And then, all of a sudden, Leah is blessed with 2 more boys and a girl, Dinah. But then God finally opens Rachel's womb. Which one's this one? Her firstborn.
Joseph.
Yeah, Joseph. Yep, and then Benjamin, the youngest. So now you got 1 guy, 4 women, 13 descendants. So Isaac and Rebecca played favorites. What did Jacob do?
He didn't learn a thing from his father.
Didn't learn a thing. Who was his favorite? Rachel, and by extension, Joseph. How many of you have seen Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat? That was one of the musicals that they did at our little community theater in Story City. Really fun retelling of the story. It's not, it's mostly based on the story in the Bible. Joseph is the favorite son, and so how does his father honor him above all 10 of his older brothers?
It's a coat of many colors.
Yeah, it can be translated a couple of different ways. Either a coat of many colors, so a rainbow technicolor dream coat, or it can also be translated a coat with long sleeves.
Oh, really?
Yes, which would have been really impractical for working. And so it was like, this is the favorite son. I don't want even to even have to lift a finger. How does that go over with the 10 older ones? Not well. No, they hate him. And then, what does Joseph start having? Dreams. Yeah, what are the dreams? Right. He's like, hey, brothers, I had this strange dream last night. We were out in the fields. We were harvesting. We were putting up our shocks of grain. All of us had shocks of grain. And all of a sudden, all of your shocks of grain gathered around mine and bowed down to it. What do you think that could possibly mean? They're like, are you kidding me? You're the youngest. You're the... Just because you're your daddy's favorite doesn't mean that you get to be in charge. Come on. They're despising him. And then a little bit later, he has another dream. Oh, Mom, Dad, brothers, I had this dream last night. There were 10 stars in the sky, and my star was shining the brightest, and of all the others, and all 10 stars in the sky, and the sun and the moon all bowed down to my star. What could that mean? How did that go over with Esau? Or sorry, with Jacob? No, he's like, what? You're thinking that I and your mom and all your brothers are going to bow down to you? You're the youngest. So what do his brothers plan for him? Let's get rid of this dreamer. So they're out, far away, pasturing the flocks, and Dad sends young Joseph out to bring a report back on the brothers. So he goes out, hey guys, how's it going? And what do? They grab him, rip his precious robe off, throw him down into a well. And they're plotting about what should we do with this guy. We got to get rid of him, get rid of that dreamer. And one of them wants to kill him, and most of the rest are going along with it. But then another one of the younger ones says, no, let's not kill him. Let's and then they saw some traders going by caravan. They said, we'll do even better. We'll get rid of him by selling him. He can be a slave. They're going to Egypt. Sound familiar? And so they sell him for 20 pieces of silver. What do they do with his coat?
Some blood on it or something?
Rip it all up, put animal blood on it, take it back home, show it to Dad. Say, I don't know where Joseph is, but we found his coat.
Hopefully he was lunch.
He's like, oh no, my son has been killed by a wild animal. Mourns for him. Well, so just like Abram and Sarai went down to Egypt, it's like there's, so if this is kind of like a little map of the Mediterranean Sea here, and this is, the land of Canaan, or what we now know as Israel. They had started out in Ur, and then had moved to Haran, and then came here, and then went down to Egypt, and then came back. Now Joseph is taken down to Egypt. And who does he end up working for? Yeah, Potiphar. He was the captain of the guard, so a pretty high up official. And everything that Joseph touches gets better. Potiphar notices, he's like, this guy, something about him. Let's promote him. So it puts him in charge of his whole household. He's second in command of the captain of the guard's household. It's going pretty good. But then what happens?
Potiphar's wife.
Potiphar's wife says, that Joseph is a fine young man. Over and over tries to seduce him. He said, no, that's against my beliefs. That would be a horrible thing to do to your husband. No, not going to do that. And eventually, she's pleading with him, grabs hold of his outer garment, and he gets out of there and leaves the garment behind. And so when Potiphar comes home, what does his wife do? Your servant tried to have his way with me. Look, he even left, and I screamed, and, he left his cloak behind. Potiphar is so angry, he has put in prison. Things are not going well for Joseph. But what happens in prison? Yeah, well, no, he doesn't have dreams. Actually, the first thing that happens, same sort of thing. Everything that Joseph does gets noticed and is blessed by God. And the prison warden thinks really highly of Joseph. This is a great guy. Puts him in charge of the whole prison. But there he is in prison. And then two other guys get put in prison. You remember who they were?
Pharaoh's baker and cupbearer.
Yeah, his baker and his cupbearer. So two really important guys in Pharaoh's household. And they both have these strange dreams that they just can't figure out, and they tell Joseph about it. And Joseph said, well, I don't have the answers for you, but God does. Here's what it means. Cupbearer, you dreamed about, that you were back in Pharaoh's throne room and you had 3 clusters of grapes and you squeezed them into the cup and gave it to Pharaoh. That means that in 3 days, you're going to be restored to your position. And everything's going to go great. And the baker said, yeah, I had this dream too. I had on my head a basket with 3 loaves of bread in it. And I was bringing them to Pharaoh. But then birds came and ate the bread. What does that mean? Oh, Joseph said, I wish I didn't have to tell you this. It means in 3 days, you're going to be lifted up and your head's going to be taken off. And sure enough, that happened. 3 days later, the baker was executed. So cupbearer is back in Pharaoh's, in the court again. Completely forgets about Joseph. Joseph sits there for years. Then what happens?
Pharaoh has a dream.
Mm-hmm. He has two dreams. Pharaoh has two dreams. And, he's just baffled by them and worried. And so he asks his astrologers and magicians and all these fortune tellers and stuff, please, explain the dream to me. And they're like, okay, tell us the dream and we'll tell you what it means. He said, no, I don't trust that. You tell me what the dreams were and give me the interpretation. Then I'll know that you really know your stuff. And they're like, what? No king ever has asked for that. You're asking the impossible. Just tell us the dream and the dreams, and then we'll tell you what they mean. Nope. You have to tell me what it means, or I'm going to kill all of you. Well, word gets back to Joseph, or no, then suddenly the cupbearer remembers. What? There's the guy in prison who told me what my dream meant. Tells Pharaoh about it. Pharaoh has Joseph brought and says, can you tell me the dreams? And Joseph said, I can't. I don't have that power. But God does. Prays about it. And God tells him what it was. So do you remember what the two dreams Pharaoh had were? Yeah. So one of them was there were these skinny, 7 skinny cow or 7 fat cows came up out of the Nile, and they were gorgeous cows. And then 7 skinny cows came up out of the Nile and ate the other 7 cows. Like these are toothy cows or something. Swallowed up the 7 fat cows, but they didn't. The skinny cows stayed skinny. And then he dreamed about 7 stalks of wheat, these beautiful heads of grain, big, luscious heads of 7 stalks of grain. And then 7 more stalks came up, but they were lean and scrawny and withered, and they consumed the other. Suddenly, these blades of wheat are eating the other wheat, and yet they stay all scrawny and withered. What does it mean? Joseph said, here's what those dreams mean. It's the same dream. There's going to be 7 years of bountiful harvests. This is what God is sending. Harvests like you've never seen. So much. But after that, 7 years of famine will come. More devastating than any years of famine ever. So you should find someone to save up lots of grain in those years of plenty, so that then you'll have enough for the lean years. And Pharaoh said, well, who could there possibly be who is better equipped for that? Who knows more than you, Joseph? I'm making you second in command. So here he goes from slavery and prison to suddenly second in command of all of Egypt. And the 7 years of plenty come and happen, and he has the people gather up lots of grain into Pharaoh's storehouses. He has like this, essentially tax on everybody. You have to bring in, I don't know if it was 10 or 20% of everything, bring it into the storehouses, fill them up, build more storehouses. And so they were just overflowing with grain, more grain than they could count. But then those 7 lean years came, and it was a devastating famine. There was no food to be had anywhere in the region. Pharaoh had grain. And so he opened it up and started selling the grain to the people. What about Jacob's family? They all got hungry. Famine was up here too. But they heard there was grain in Egypt. So they came down to Egypt looking for grain. And of course, who did they have to talk to? Joseph. So Jacob had sent all of his sons except one. Which one? Yeah, it's Benjamin. I'm not going to send him. He's my precious. My favorite son is gone. I'm going to hang on to him. Sends the other 10 brothers down there. Well, of course, Jacob recognizes them immediately. Joseph recognizes them immediately, but they don't recognize Joseph. Imagine he looked a lot different, head shaved and royal garb and all this, and he was speaking to them through an interpreter. He was speaking Egyptian, but he could understand what they were saying to each other. Accuses them of being spies. No, we really do. We're 10 of 12 sons of our father back in Canaan, and we're really just here to buy grain. And said, prove it. If you really are who you say you are, bring that last son, Benjamin, his closest brother. Bring him here, and I will keep one of you here until the rest of you return. So he puts one of them in prison, sends the rest back to Canaan with lots of grain and their money on top of the sacks of grain. They get home and they're like, and they tell them the whole story that, we had to leave Reuben or whoever it was down in Egypt, and here's why. He wants us to bring Benjamin. And Dad's like, no way. I am not losing my last, most precious son. I've already lost Joseph. We're going to sit tight. And they open up the sacks and they're like, what? Here's all of our money. Now he's going to doubly think that how did that get in here? He's going to think that we're, traitors and robbers. So they just sit there, leave that other brother rotting in prison. Well, eventually, this is only like year 2 or something of the famine. They run out of food again. And they're like, Dad, Egypt's the only place that has grain, but we've got to bring Benjamin with us. And so finally, Jacob relents and sends Benjamin with them and bring him down. And they're welcomed, and Joseph throws a whole party for them, and makes sure that Benjamin is given twice as much as any of the rest of the brother, or maybe it's 5 times as much. Like, pile it on his plate. And then they go to leave, and not only does he have the steward put all the money back in the sacks again, but he also has his favorite cup that he uses for divination, whatever that means, put in Benjamin's sack. And then, they get off a little ways heading home, and up runs a whole contingent of troops saying, wait a minute, one of you has stolen the cup. And they're like, what? We wouldn't do that. No way. But they open up this and they say, whoever's sack, if it's in one of our sacks, whoever stole it will be put to death. Well, they open up all the sacks and they get to Benjamin's. There's the cup. No! And then all of the brothers fall down on their knees and say, please, don't take Benjamin's life, take all of ours, but let him go. And Joseph has this incredible sense of deja vu. All his brothers bowing down to him. And he can't stand it anymore. And he gets everybody out of the room and finally reveals himself to him and says, I'm Joseph. I'm your brother. And they're just shocked. And he says, don't worry. I'm going to take care of you. But I know that there's going to be 5 more years of famine. So go and get Dad and everybody and bring them all down here. And I'll take care of you. And so they go up with full sacks of grain and overflowing gifts. And they bring Benjamin and everybody back and talk to Jacob. And he says, okay, can my son really be alive? And makes the trip back down to Egypt. And Joseph sets them up royally with the best land that's perfect for all their flocks and herds. And they live happily ever after. Eventually, Jacob dies. And quite a few years before that, when Benjamin was born, Rachel died in childbirth. And so he had buried her in a tomb in Canaan, bought a field. And that was so here Abram had been told, I'm going to give you this whole land as your inheritance. Isaac had his whole life. Jacob is at the end of his days. The only piece of land he owns is Rachel's tomb. And Jacob, as he's about to die, says to Joseph, take my bones back after I'm dead and bury me there with Rachel. And Joseph does that. Takes him up with a whole big procession and buries him there. And goes back to Egypt. So they live for quite a while there, and what happens to those Israelites? They keep multiplying. God told them, I'm going to make your descendants like the stars in the sky. So they become super prosperous. But then what happens? Some years go by. Joseph dies. Another Pharaoh comes along who says, Joseph who? And he looks at all of these Israelites, all these foreigners living in their midst, and starts getting afraid of them. Says, they're getting so prosperous, so numerous, they could overpower us. This is a whole other nation living right in our midst. I know what we'll do. We'll make them our slaves. And so he has them build their cities, their pyramids, enslaves them for 400 years. There was another story I forgot to mention about Jacob. When Jacob was wandering around, actually when he was on his way back to Haran, he had a dream. Remember what that dream was? Yeah. He's, got his head on a rock for a pillow. And he dreams that there's this ladder or staircase stretching all the way up to heaven. And he sees angels, God's messengers, going up and down on the ladder. And God himself at the top. And God spoke to him and said, this land where you are lying right now, I will give to you and your descendants. I will make you into a great nation. And this is before he even met Rachel, let alone had all these kids. And Jacob trusted God. He set that stone up. When he woke up, he poured oil on it and, said, this is going to be a memorial stone for this promise that I've been given. So in that whole story of this gnarled family tree, what are some patterns that you noticed? Rivalry between siblings, yep. Infidelity. Multiple wives doesn't help things. What else? What else made the family tree even more gnarled? Yeah, arguing over the birthright. Isn't it interesting how often God chooses the secondborn? He chose Isaac, not Ishmael. He chose Jacob, not Esau. He chose Joseph, not the other 10 brothers before him. He was like turning things upside down.
I wonder why they didn't divide things evenly.
That was the tradition back then. It was firstborn gets preferential treatment. Yep. And, yeah.
Does the Bible, Ishmael and all his descendants?
Yeah.
Is that
we're not told, but we're told who those sons were. That's pretty much all we hear about them. Yep. But we know that's where all the Arab nations came from.
Yeah.
So if you line it up with the history of Arab nations, let's see.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like in the Quran, for example, they trace all of their lineage back to Ishmael. Only they say Ishmael was the chosen one, not Isaac. Ishmael is the true son of Abraham. And of course, parents picking favorites. Here and here and here.
That seemed to be a thing.
Generation after generation, and it never goes well. We can see these patterns in our own families. And, so often, so many people think that the Bible is full of stories about heroes. But when you read it, it's really full of dysfunctional families. These people make a mess of their lives. They don't listen well to God's voice, even when he speaks directly to him. They hurt one another, sometimes on purpose. There's a book called Flawed Families of the Bible that talk about how the Bible displays the complexities and the struggles of life as we experience it. They say, if we think our lives are a mess, look at what the people in the Bible went through. And God never abandoned them. God's grace somehow managed to work through all their imperfections. The stories of families in the Bible are raw, uncensored, bitter reminders of how awful family life can become. And so in these stories, we can see examples and reflections of our own brokenness. These people haven't changed that much, have they? We still have the same jealousies and rivalries and struggles. We experience the same kind of pain and heartache. But we have the same God who walks with us and works for good, even in the midst of our dysfunction and brokenness. And we're given all these instructions about honor your father and mother, be faithful to one another as husband and wife. Children, obey your parents and everything. Fathers, don't provoke your children, or they may lose heart. What about, you should have said, mothers, don't provoke your children, or they may try to kill each other. But even though all this stuff trickles down into generation after generation, I mean, Jacob wrestled. He sent all of his flocks and herds and family ahead of him when he was going home, because Esau was coming to meet him with 400 men. And Jacob ended up staying on the other side of the river that night and wrestling with somebody all the way through the night. And as the day was breaking, the guy said, "Let me go. Day's coming." And he said, "I won't let you go unless you bless me." I said, "Okay, I'm going to change your name. You're not going to be Jacob anymore. You're going to be Israel," which means wrestles with God, because you have wrestled with God and with humans and have prevailed. Isn't that a perfect name for that nation? God's people wrestling with God and with people as they continue to do today. And so do we. We all come from flawed families, but God uses us to bless the world. He chooses the weak things in the world to shame the strong. He chooses the lowly things of the world and the despised things so that no one may boast. He says, "My grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness." And we see that too in the story of Jesus. So many echoes here. Jesus also went from Israel when they had to flee from Herod. Where did they go? Egypt. So he was a refugee, and he then came back home. And his own brothers and sisters tried to pull him back down, but he said, "I've got a bigger purpose." There's so many different connections between the story of Israel and Jesus. Even though we all come from flawed families, God uses us to be a blessing to the rest of the world. So, trying and exploring this spiritual family tree, and my own spiritual family tree have helped me learn a lot about the biblical story and about my own family and about myself. So it's helped me see some of the same sorts of patterns in my family and how those patterns tend to repeat themselves. So if you're intrigued by the idea of exploring your own family tree, I invite you to take a copy of the questions that I distributed a couple of weeks ago, and the sheet that's got the little diagrams of how to chart that. And of course, there's all sorts of different ways of drawing your tree. For mine, I did the tree rings, or a rainbow. You remember that I presented a few weeks ago? When Dorothy presented hers, she did this kind of like stepping stones. I've seen other people who've done like line graphs, or a twisty road, or a roller coaster, or just like clusters of this and then this and then this and then this kind of shape me this way. Whatever makes most sense to you, to help you draw out your own story. I encourage you to do that. And if you'd like to share, I'd love to have you share here as well. So next Sunday is our Sunday School Harvest Fest. So we're going to be across the street. We won't have class here. We'll be over there with the kids, having a lot of fun and doing that together. Is there one of you who would like to present the following week, the 20th?
Martha said she was thinking about doing it next week,
Well,
so it would be,
Yeah, it'd be the following week, the 20th. So I'll talk with Martha and see if she's interested.
Yeah.
Anybody else want to be on deck?
yeah, it says the 20th.
Oh, the 20th. Oh, okay, okay. So next week, well, I'll talk with Martha, but anyone, if Martha's not able, anybody else interested in sharing theirs? Sure. Okay. So I'll have you on deck maybe after Martha, whenever she's able to. Yeah, and after Harvest Fest. Yep. All right, I'll talk with her. I know Sarah had talked about she would be willing to share hers at some point too, so we'll plug them in, and as you think about it, let me know if you're interested in sharing, drawing out and sharing yours. You can ask me any questions along the way. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful week. And